I was my grandmother's favorite. I had the MBA, I had the plan, and I had her promise. But when the lawyer opened her will, my $50 million life vanished in a single sentence. My cousin Vivian, the girl who hadn't worked a day in her life, was suddenly the owner of everything I'd built. She thought she played the perfect game by whispering lies in a dying woman's ear. But she forgot one thing. I don't just know how to run a company, I know how to bankrupt one. And I'm starting with hers. The rain came down in sheets, turning the gravel driveway of Ashford Manor into a river of gray sludge. Charlotte Ashford stood at the iron gates, watching her life being ejected from the only home she'd ever known. Cardboard boxes, cheap ones, the kind purchased in bulk from moving supply warehouses, sailed through the air from the second-floor balcony. Her clothes, still on hangers, landed in muddy puddles. Books she'd collected since childhood splayed open in the downpour, their pages absorbing water like sponges. A framed photograph of her parents hit the cobblestones with a crack that echoed across the estate grounds. "Do be careful with those," Vivian's voice carried from the balcony, dripping with mock concern. "Some of them might be worth something at a yard sale." Charlotte didn't move, didn't flinch. She stood there, cashmere coat already soaked through, and watched, catalogued, remembered. Vivian appeared at the balcony railing, backlit by the warm glow of the manor's interior. She wore a silk robe, Charlotte's silk robe, actually, the ivory fret set that had been a gift from Grandmother Ashford. Her cousin's face was flushed with champagne in triumph, her red lips curved in a smile that belonged on a Renaissance painting of a particularly vindictive saint. "You know, Charlotte, I really did try to convince the executors to let you stay through the weekend," Vivian called down, her voice carrying that particular cadence of false sympathy she'd perfected over the years. "But the lawyers were quite insistent. The property transfers today, and well," she gestured vaguely at the boxes now strewn across the lawn like casualties of war, "we can't have unauthorized persons on the premises." Unauthorized persons. Charlotte tasted copper. She'd bitten the inside of her cheek without realizing it. Marcus, the head of security who'd been with the family for 20 years, approached with an umbrella. His face was carefully neutral, but Charlotte saw the muscle working in his jaw. "Miss Charlotte," he said quietly, "I've called you a car. It's waiting at the service entrance." "Thank you, Marcus." Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "I'm sorry," he murmured, positioning the umbrella over her. "We all are. This isn't right." "No," Charlotte agreed, her eyes still fixed on Vivian. "It isn't." From the balcony, Vivian clapped her hands together. "Oh, Marcus, do stop fraternizing. You work for the estate now, which means you work for me, and I'd hate to have to let you go on your first day under my employment." Her smile sharpened. "Especially with that daughter of yours starting at Northwestern in the fall. Those tuition payments must be daunting." Marcus's hand tightened on the umbrella handle. Charlotte touched his arm gently. "It's fine. I can manage." As she turned to leave, Vivian's voice rang out one final time. "Charlotte, you forgot something." Charlotte looked back to see her cousin holding up a small wooden desk, antique, Victorian, utterly unremarkable except for the water damage along one leg. "Grandmother's legacy gift to you. Can't forget this priceless heirloom." "I had it appraised, you know, $300. That's what 28 years of devotion bought you. I do hope it was worth it." The desk tumbled end over end, hitting the gravel with a crack. One of the legs split, and the drawer face splintered. Charlotte walked to it, knelt in the mud, and lifted it. It was heavier than it looked, waterlogged now. She could feel the cold seeping through her coat, through her skin, settling into her bones. "I'll have someone collect the rest," she said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Ugh, don't bother." Vivian waved a hand dismissively. "I'm having it all burned tomorrow. Can't have the new interior designer thinking we're running some sort of charity donation center." The walk to the service entrance felt infinite. Charlotte carried the desk, her arms burning, her shoes sinking into the manicured lawn with each step. Behind her, she could hear Vivian's laughter mixing with the sound of the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. The car Marcus had called was a black town car, not one of the family vehicles. The driver, someone she didn't recognize, helped her place the desk in the trunk. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer sympathy. She was grateful for that. As the car pulled away, Charlotte allowed herself one final glance at Ashford Manor. Vivian was still on the balcony, champagne flute raised in a mock toast. The lights in every window blazed. Her cousin had always been wasteful, and Charlotte could see shadows moving inside. The party, it seemed, was just beginning. She turned away and stared at the passing landscape. The rain continued to fall. The desk rattled in the trunk. And Charlotte Ashford, who had spent 28 years being the good cousin, the patient one, the strategist who played the long game, began to calculate. Vivian had made her first mistake tonight. She let Charlotte leave with the desk. She'd made her second mistake months ago, though she didn't know it yet. And by the time she realized what she'd done, it would be far too late. The law offices of Whitmore, Chen and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of the Ashford building in downtown Chicago. The irony wasn't lost on Charlotte. Even in death, Grandmother Ashford had ensured the family business towered over the city. The conference room overlooked Michigan Avenue, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of late summer sunlight glinting off the Chicago River. Inside, the air conditioning was set to Arctic, and the mahogany table gleamed under recessed lighting. Old money always kept things cold and polished. Charlotte arrived 15 minutes early, as always. Vivian arrived 20 minutes late, as always. Sorry, Vivian breezed in, trailing Chanel No. 5 and a young man in an expensive suit who looked uncomfortable. Traffic was absolutely brutal. You know how it is. She didn't wait for an answer, settling into the chair directly across from Charlotte with a theatrical sigh. Charles, darling, do sit down. You're making everyone nervous hovering like that. Charles, Charlotte assumed he was Vivian's latest acquisition, some trust fund spawn from the club circuit, sat obediently. Theodore Whitmore, senior partner and executor of Eleanor Ashford's estate, cleared his throat. He was 73, silver-haired, and had the kind of voice that suggested generations of courtroom victories. Now that we're all assembled, we can proceed with the reading of Eleanor Margaret Ashford's last will and testament. Charlotte's hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still. She'd learned that from Grandmother. Never fidget, never reveal anxiety. It was a tell, and tells could be exploited. Across the table, Vivian was already fidgeting with her phone, her attention span as limited as ever. She'd gained weight since the funeral, probably stress eating or celebration eating. With Vivian, it was hard to tell. The estate, Theodore began, valued at approximately $52 million, including the Ashford Manor property, the downtown building, investment portfolios, and various other assets, is to be distributed as follows. Charlotte felt the world narrow to Theodore's voice. This was it. Grandmother had promised her, in those final lucid moments before the medications had clouded her mind, that everything would be taken care of, that Charlotte's years of devotion wouldn't be unrewarded. "You've been the daughter I never had," Grandmother whispered, her paper-thin hand gripping Charlotte's with surprising strength. "Vivian is blood, but you, my dear, you're the one who inherited the Ashford mind. Everything is arranged. To Vivian Catherine Ashford, I leave the entirety of my estate." The words hit like a physical blow. Charlotte's vision actually dimmed at the edges, tunnel vision closing in as Theodore continued reading, his voice taking on that careful neutrality lawyers used when delivering bad news. With the exception of one legacy gift to Charlotte Ann Ashford, the Victorian writing desk from my bedroom, which belonged to my grandmother, and the contents thereof. Silence. Then Vivian's laugh, bright and sharp. "A desk? She left her a desk? She turned to Charlotte, eyes wide with false sympathy. "Oh, Charlie, I'm so sorry. I had no idea grandmother had changed her will. This must be such a shock." Charlotte's throat had closed. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Changed her will? When? Grandmother was so certain, so clear, right until— "I'd like to see the will," Charlotte managed, her voice foreign to her own ears. The original. Theodore exchanged a glance with his associate, Margaret Chen. "Of course, though I should mention it's been thoroughly vetted. Mrs. Ashford updated her will 8 months ago, and it was witnessed by 2 independent parties, neither of whom had any stake in the estate." 8 months ago. That was October. Charlotte was in London then, finalizing the merger with Pemberton Holdings, a deal that saved the Ashford Corporation from a hostile takeover. Grandmother had insisted she go, said it was crucial that Charlotte handle it personally. The will was brought out, encased in a leather folder. Charlotte read it twice, then a third time. The signatures looked right. The witnesses were Dr. Harrison, grandmother's physician, and Linda Pembroke, her nurse. Both impeccable, both credible, both employed by the estate and therefore dependent on grandmother's continued favor. "I don't understand," Charlotte said, looking up at Theodore. "She told me—" "Told you what?" Vivian leaned forward, all faux concern. "Oh, sweetie, were you counting on an inheritance? Is that why you've been playing devoted granddaughter all these years?" She reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of Charlotte's. "I had no idea you were so mercenary about it." Charles shifted uncomfortably. Margaret Chen's pen stilled on her notepad. Charlotte pulled back, creating distance. "I'm requesting a full review of grandmother's medical records from the period when this will was signed. I'd also like to speak with Dr. Harrison and Miss Pembroke." "Are you suggesting?" Theodore began, but Vivian cut him off. "She's suggesting our grandmother wasn't of sound mind." Vivian's voice had cooled several degrees, the sympathy vanishing like morning frost. "Which is insulting, not to mention legally actionable. Grandmother was sharp as a tack until the end. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows she was on 17 different medications in her final year. Medications that can cause confusion, memory loss, susceptibility to suggestion. This is bordering on slander, Miss Ashford," Theodore warned. "I'd advise caution. I'm advising a review. Surely that's reasonable, given the circumstances." Vivian stood, gathering her purse. "Review all you want, Charlotte. You'll find everything in perfect order. Grandmother made her choice. She chose blood over—" She gestured vaguely at Charlotte. "Whatever you are." The words hung in the air like poison. Charlotte had been 3 when her parents died in a sailing accident off the coast of Maine. Grandmother had taken her in, raised her alongside Vivian. They'd been sisters in everything but name. Except they hadn't been, not really, because Vivian had always been the actual granddaughter, the blood heir, and Charlotte had always been the charity case. "The desk will be delivered to your apartment tomorrow," Theodore said, his tone gentler now. "I'm truly sorry, Charlotte. If you choose to contest the will, that's your right, but I should warn you, it will be expensive, time-consuming, and, based on what I've seen, unlikely to succeed." Charlotte stood, her legs somehow still working. "Thank you for your time." She made it to the elevator before the shaking started, made it to the parking garage before the tears came, and made it back to her apartment before the rage set in, cold, clear, and calculating. Vivian had stolen her inheritance. More than that, she'd stolen 28 years of Charlotte's life, years spent believing she was building towards something, that loyalty and competence mattered, that grandmother's love had been real. But as Charlotte stood in her apartment that night, staring at the Chicago skyline, she realized something else. Vivian was arrogant, sloppy, she always had been, and arrogance was exploitable. Charlotte had spent a decade learning to read corporate balance sheets, to spot the irregularities that hid beneath polished presentations. She knew how to find what people tried to hide. If Vivian had forged that will, there would be evidence. There always was. The question wasn't whether the evidence existed. The question was whether Charlotte had the stomach to use it. She thought of Vivian's laugh, the way she said, "Whatever you are." Yes, Charlotte decided, she definitely had the stomach for it. The apartment was in Rogers Park, a sixth-floor walk-up that smelled of curry and desperation. Charlotte's new reality measured 480 square feet, with a kitchen that was technically just a hot plate and a mini-fridge tucked into what might generously be called an alcove. The bathroom had tiles from 1973 and water pressure that suggested the building's plumbing shared her sense of defeat. She'd paid first and last month rent with her emergency savings, $3,200 that was supposed to last until she found a new position. Except finding a new position was proving difficult when your previous employer was your grandmother's estate, and your reference was your cousin who'd just stolen your inheritance. The first call had come from Whitmore, Chen and Associates. "We're afraid we can't provide a professional reference given the circumstances." Translation, Vivian had made it clear that supporting Charlotte would be career suicide. The second call had been her own, asking Marcus if any of her belongings had been salvaged from the bonfire Vivian had promised. His response had been delivered in a careful monotone. "Miss Vivian has instructed all staff that contact with you constitutes grounds for immediate termination. I have a daughter in college, Miss Charlotte. I'm sorry." She didn't blame him. That was Vivian's genius, really. She understood that power wasn't just about what you could do, but making sure everyone else understood what you could do. The desk would be delivered 3 days after the eviction, hauled up 6 flights of stairs by 2 movers who'd clearly drawn the short straw that morning. It sat now in the corner of the apartment, taking up a disproportionate amount of space, its broken leg propped up with books Charlotte had salvaged from the lawn. A water-damaged copy of The Prince, 2 volumes of financial analysis texts, and a pristine copy of the 48 Laws of Power that grandmother had given her on her 21st birthday. "Power is not what you have, it's what people believe you have," grandmother had written in the inscription. Charlotte had believed grandmother had power over her own affairs. She was wrong. She spent the first week in a haze, sending out resumes to positions she was overqualified for and receiving rejection after rejection. It took her 3 days to realize what was happening. Someone was poisoning the well. A phone call to a former colleague at Pemberton Holdings confirmed it. "Look, Charlotte, off the record, Vivian's people have been making calls. They're saying you had a breakdown, that you became obsessed with your grandmother's estate, that you made threats. There's even a rumor you tried to forge documents." Michael's voice had been apologetic but firm. "I can't touch this. Nobody can. The Ashford name still carries weight in Chicago, and right now that name is Vivian's." She ended the call and sat on the floor of her apartment, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, and laughed. The sound had startled her, bitter and sharp and utterly foreign. Vivian wasn't just stealing her inheritance, she was erasing her entire professional existence. It was elegant, really, scorched earth policy. Charlotte would have admired it if she wasn't the target. By the second week, her savings had dwindled to $800. She'd applied for 17 positions, received 15 rejections, and 2 never bothered to respond. She'd sold her Cartier watch, a graduation present from grandmother, for 1/3 of its value to a pawn shop on Broadway. She'd started buying ramen in bulk and learned that the bodega on the corner sold day-old pastries for $1. The desk sat in the corner, a monument to her failure. It was during the 3rd week, when the heat had been shut off due to a billing error that would take 7 to 10 business days to resolve, that Charlotte finally looked at it, really looked at it. Victorian, grandmother had said. The wood was walnut, darkened with age and water damage. The legs were turned, the detailing minimal, nothing exceptional. Theodore had mentioned an appraisal, $300, barely enough to cover a month's utilities. But grandmother had been specific in the will. "The Victorian writing desk from my bedroom and the contents thereof." Charlotte had assumed the contents were long gone, probably cleared out when Vivian had the manor refreshed with her interior designer. But the will was specific, contents thereof. Charlotte approached the desk like it might bite.
The top drawer was warped, swollen with water damage from its flight through the rain. She pulled. Nothing. Pulled harder. The drawer moved a quarter inch, then stuck. "Come on," Charlotte muttered, bracing her foot against the desk. "Come on." The drawer gave way suddenly, sending her stumbling backward. Inside, there was nothing but dust and the smell of old wood and older secrets. The second drawer was locked. Charlotte stared at the small brass keyhole, tarnished with age. Of course it was locked. Grandmother probably lost the key decades ago, and Vivian certainly wouldn't have bothered to search for it. She tried a bobby pin, then a paperclip, her fingers clumsy with cold and desperation. Nothing. The lock held firm, ancient and stubborn. In the kitchen alcove, she found a butter knife, the only utensil she'd purchased. She wedged it into the gap between the drawer and the frame, leveraging her weight against it. The wood cracked with a sound like breaking bones.
Charlotte froze, breathing hard. Then she pulled the drawer completely free, splintering the lock mechanism. The drawer was lined with faded velvet, once red, now the color of dried blood. And nested inside, wrapped in oilcloth that crinkled like old skin, was a leather journal. Her hands were shaking as she unwrapped it. The leather was embossed with gold lettering, worn almost smooth. EMA 1982. Eleanor Margaret Ashford. Charlotte carried it to the window where the afternoon light was strongest. The first page was dated January 3rd, 1982, the year before Charlotte's father, Thomas Ashford, had been born. Today I discovered that Harold has been skimming from the discretionary accounts. He believes I don't review the quarterly reports myself. He's wrong. I've documented everything. A wife who cannot trust her husband must become her own accountant. Charlotte's breath caught. She turned the page. February 17th, 1982. Harold's mistress has expensive taste. The apartment in Gold Coast, the jewelry, the travel. He's been using subsidiary funds to cover it. Margaret Chen's father handled the initial paperwork. I've copied everything. Page after page, spanning decades, Grandmother's careful script documented every financial indiscretion, every affair, every lie that had threaded through the Ashford family history. Harold, grandfather, featured prominently in the early entries. Then came Charlotte's father, Thomas, and his brief, reckless business ventures before he'd settled down. And then, starting in 2010, Vivian. June 4th, 2010. Vivian has begun taking money from the household accounts. Small amounts she thinks she won't notice. $5,000 here, $3,000 there. I've instructed the accountants to track every withdrawal. September 2014. The Pemberton deal nearly collapsed because Vivian leaked confidential information to a competitor. She was trying to position herself for a better offer. I had to pay $2 million to keep everyone quiet. Charlotte doesn't know. She'd be devastated to learn how close her project came to failing. March 2019. Dr. Harrison has been adjusting my medication dosages at Vivian's request. He claims it's for my own good. I've been documenting the changes, the way my mind fogs, the way time slips. When I confronted him, he looked frightened. They think I don't understand what they're doing. Charlotte's vision blurred. She wiped her eyes, kept reading. October 2023. Vivian has brought a new will for me to sign. She chose the day after my medication was increased. I signed it. I had to. She was watching so carefully. But I've dated this entry, I've documented everything, and I've made arrangements. My darling Charlotte, if you're reading this, it means the desk found its way to you. I knew Vivian would never open it. She always was too impatient for locked drawers. Inside the false bottom, you'll find everything you need. Account numbers, passwords, the real will, the one I recorded 3 days before that monster convinced me to sign hers, and the evidence of what she's done. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. The medications make it so hard to think clearly, to plan, but I've left you this. Use it well. Make her pay for what she's stolen. Remember, power is not what you have, it's what people believe you have. And right now, Charlotte, you have everything.
Charlotte's hands were steady now as she felt along the bottom of the drawer. There, a slight seam in the velvet. She pried it up with her fingernails, revealing a thin wooden panel. Beneath it, a USB drive, a set of account statements, and a sealed envelope marked Last Will and Testament of Eleanor Margaret Ashford, with the date 6 months before the will Theodore had read. And beneath that, a second journal, this one slimmer, marked Black Ledger. Charlotte opened it with hands that no longer shook and began to read. By the time the sun set, painting her apartment in shades of amber and blood, Charlotte Ashford was no longer the defeated heir living on ramen and regret. She was something else entirely. She was a weapon freshly loaded and carefully aimed, and Vivian's name was carved into every bullet. Alexander Sterling's office was in a converted warehouse in West Loop, the kind of space that real estate agents called industrial chic and lawyers called affordable. His practice had occupied the same 800 square feet for 3 years now, ever since Vivian Ashford had him disbarred from the firm that bore his name, Sterling, Rothman and Associates. The firm still existed. Sterling didn't practice there anymore. Charlotte found him on a Wednesday morning, after 2 weeks of meticulous research through the Black Ledger's entries. Grandmother had been thorough. The ledger didn't just document Vivian's crimes, it documented her victims. Alexander Sterling was number 7 on a list of 12. The door was unmarked except for a small placard, Sterling Legal Consulting. Charlotte knocked twice, then entered without waiting for a response. Inside, the space smelled of coffee and printer ink. A single desk dominated the room, covered in case files and legal pads. Behind it sat a man who'd once commanded a corner office on the 40th floor. He looked up, eyes sharpening. "We don't take walk-ins, appointments only." "You'll want to take this meeting," Charlotte closed the door behind her. "I'm Charlotte Ashford." The change in his expression was minute, a slight tightening around the eyes, a fractional pause before he set down his pen. "I see. Should I call security, or will you leave voluntarily?" "You don't have security. The building shares a single guard who spends most of his shift watching YouTube in the lobby." Charlotte moved closer, noting the way Sterling's hand shifted toward his drawer. Mace, probably, or a panic button. "And I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because we have a common enemy." "I don't have enemies. I have former clients who made poor decisions." "You had a career. Then you had Vivian Ashford." Charlotte pulled out the chair across from his desk and sat without an invitation. 3 years ago, you were representing the Ashford Corporation in a dispute with the Carmichael Group. You advised against settling, recommended taking it to trial. You had evidence of fraud, solid evidence that would have destroyed Carmichael's case. Sterling's face remained neutral, but his hand had moved away from the drawer. "That case is sealed. Vivian settled for $30 million, then had you disbarred for misappropriation of client funds that mysteriously disappeared from an escrow account you'd managed for 5 years without incident. Except the funds didn't disappear. Vivian transferred them herself, then altered the records to frame you. She needed you gone because you'd started asking questions about her side dealings with the Carmichael Group. The settlement wasn't a settlement, it was a payoff. She'd been feeding information the entire time." Sterling was very still. "That's an interesting theory." "It's not a theory. I have the bank records, the real ones, before they were altered. I have emails between Vivian and James Carmichael. I have the escrow transfer orders with her digital signature." Charlotte pulled out her phone, scrolled, then turned it toward him. "I have everything." He stared at the screen, his jaw working. The email was dated 2 weeks before his disbarment hearing. Vivian's address to Carmichael. "Problem solved. Vivian won't be an issue after Friday. The funds will be returned once the Bar Association clears. 40% as agreed." "Where did you get this?" His voice had dropped to something dangerous. "My grandmother was thorough than Vivian realized." Charlotte pulled the phone back. She documented everything. 20 years of Vivian's schemes, her fraud, her manipulations. It's all there. A complete record of every crime. "Why come to me?" Because you're good at what you do, because you have motivation, and because I need someone who understands that this isn't about justice, it's about complete and total destruction." Sterling studied her for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to a small cabinet, and pulled out 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey. He poured 2 fingers in each, slid one across the desk to Charlotte. "You want revenge. I want her to lose everything, the same way she took everything from me, from you, from everyone she's ever stepped on." Charlotte took the glass but didn't drink. "I want her to feel what it's like to have the floor drop out under her, to watch everything she's built collapse. I want her afraid, and then I want her in prison." "That's not revenge." Sterling raised his glass in a mock toast. "That's warfare. Then I'll need a general." He drank, considering. "I lost my license. I can consult, but I can't practice. I can't represent you in court. I don't need court representation. I need someone who knows how to build an unassailable case, someone who understands how to destroy an opponent before they even realize they're under attack." Charlotte finally took a sip of the whiskey. It was good, expensive, interesting for a man operating from a warehouse. "Someone who wants to watch Vivian Ashford burn as much as I do. What's your plan?"
"I'm going to make her destroy herself." Charlotte set down the glass. "She's sloppy, arrogant. She thinks she's untouchable because she's gotten away with everything so far. I'm going to use that. I'm going to give her exactly what she wants, and when she reaches for it, it's going to tear her apart." Sterling smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "How?" Charlotte opened her bag and pulled out a folder. Then, unassuming, she placed it on the desk between them. "Dubai." He opened the folder, scanned the contents. His eyebrows rose. "This is a completely fabricated real estate opportunity. Luxury condos on the Palm Jumeirah, 50-unit development, projected ROI of 340% over 5 years. The documentation is perfect. The site surveys are pristine. The partner companies are legitimate, or they appear to be, until you dig 3 layers deep. She'll have it vetted." "She will. And it will pass every surface-level check. The bank accounts are real, the holding companies are registered, the principals are actual people with actual histories in Middle Eastern development." Charlotte's voice was utterly calm. "But the deal itself is a house of cards. The moment she wires the first payment, she's committing fraud. The moment she takes money from the Ashford estate to fund it, she's embezzling. And the moment she tries to hide her participation through subsidiary accounts, she's money laundering." Sterling flipped through the pages, his expression shifting from skepticism to something approaching admiration. "This is sophisticated. I spent 10 years learning how corporations hide money. I know every trick, every loophole, every method of making funds disappear." Charlotte leaned back. "Vivian thinks she's clever because she's gotten away with petty theft and manipulation. But this is different. This is federal-level fraud. When this falls apart, it won't be a lawsuit or a family dispute. It will be criminal charges, FBI investigations, asset seizures." "How do you get her to bite?" "The same way you catch any predator. You make her hungry." Charlotte's smile was cold. "I'm going to let her think she's found something I was hiding, something I was planning before the inheritance was stolen. She's been spreading rumors that I'm unstable, desperate. I'm going to confirm those rumors. I'm going to approach small investors, people she knows, and pitch this deal. I'm going to be obvious about it, sloppy even. She'll investigate. She will, and she'll find exactly what I want her to find, a desperate woman trying to make back her lost fortune with a risky foreign investment. She'll see an opportunity. Either she'll try to steal the deal for herself, or she'll invest alongside me so she can control the outcome. Either way, she's implicated." Sterling closed the folder. "When she realizes it's fake, it will be too late. The money will be gone, the evidence will be everywhere, and she'll have nowhere to hide." Charlotte stood. "I need you to make sure the case is airtight. I need every piece of documentation to be perfect. I need someone who can walk the FBI through exactly how she committed each crime, someone who can testify to her history of fraud without sounding like a bitter ex-employee. You need me to be credible. I need you to be brilliant." Charlotte extended her hand.
I can pay you $5,000 now as a retainer. When Vivian's assets are seized, you'll get 20% of the recovery. Grandmother's ledger documents $40 million in fraudulent gains over 10 years. 20% of that is $8 million. Enough to rebuild your practice, enough to clear your name. He looked at her hand but didn't take it. What do you get out of this? I get to watch her lose everything. Charlotte's voice was absolutely level. I get to see her realize that everything she took from me, everything she destroyed, was for nothing. I get to watch her be led away in handcuffs, knowing that the rest of her life will be spent in a federal prison, sharing a cell with people who don't care about her name or her money or her connections. And then? Then I rebuild what she destroyed. Not the inheritance, I don't care about the money, but my reputation, my career, my life. I take back everything she stole that wasn't in the will. Sterling finally took her hand. His grip was firm, calculated. This is a murder, you understand. Not literal, but close enough. Once we start this, there's no stopping, no mercy, no last-minute conscience. Good, because I don't have a conscience anymore. Vivian burned it out of me 3 months ago when she threw my belongings into the rain and laughed. He smiled again, that dangerous expression. When do we start? We already have. Charlotte released her hand and picked up her bag. I'm meeting with Thomas Chen from Pemberton Holdings tomorrow. He's an old colleague, one of the few who'll still take my calls. I'm going to pitch him on Dubai. He'll decline, but he'll talk about it at the club. Vivian hears everything that happens at the club. You're using Chen as bait. I'm using everyone as bait. Charlotte moved toward the door, then paused. There's one more thing you should know. When this is over, when Vivian is in prison and the estate is being unwound, there will be questions. People will ask how I got the evidence, where the ledger came from. They'll wonder if I manipulated anything. And you need to be prepared to testify that every document I provided was authentic, that the evidence was genuine, collected by my grandmother over decades, that I did nothing illegal in obtaining it. Will that testimony be truthful? Charlotte looked back at him, her face unreadable. Does it matter? He studied her for a long moment, then shook his head. No, I suppose it doesn't. Then we understand each other. She opened the door, cold air rushing in from the hallway. I'll send the retainer tomorrow. Start reviewing the Dubai documents. Make sure they're perfect, because we only get one chance at this, and I intend to make it count. Sterling watched her leave, then returned to his desk. He picked up the folder, read through it again more carefully. The attention to detail was remarkable. The forgeries were pristine. This wasn't the work of a desperate woman. This was the work of someone who'd been planning, calculating, waiting. He opened his bottom drawer and pulled out a file he'd kept for 3 years. Inside were his own notes on the Ashford case, his own evidence of Vivian's fraud. Evidence he'd never been able to use because his credibility had been destroyed. Charlotte Ashford had just handed him a weapon, and God help Vivian, because Alexander Sterling knew exactly how to use it. The Chicago Athletic Association occupied a prime stretch of Michigan Avenue, its limestone facade suggesting the kind of permanence that only old money could buy. Inside, the walls were paneled in dark wood, and the air smelled of cigar smoke and privilege. This was where Chicago's elite conducted their real business, the kind that never made it into board minutes or official records. Charlotte arrived at 11:47 a.m., 13 minutes before her lunch meeting with Thomas Chen. She'd chosen her outfit, a suit from her previous life, Armani, tailored to perfection, but now showing slight wear at the cuffs. Her shoes were Louboutin, the soles scuffed. Her watch was missing, of course, sold 2 months ago. She looked like what she was, old money fallen on hard times. Perfect. Thomas was already at the table when she arrived, a bourbon in hand, despite the early hour. He stood when he saw her, his expression carefully neutral. "Charlotte, you look well." "Liar," she said pleasantly, sitting down. "But I appreciate the effort." He laughed, the tension breaking slightly. "Fair enough. You look like hell, but it's good to see you." Likewise, she ordered a club soda with lime. No alcohol, not yet. She needed to be sharp. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I know Vivian's been vocal about my supposed instability." Thomas's face tightened. "I don't listen to gossip. But you listen to your board, and your board listens to Vivian. The Ashford Corporation is Pemberton's 3rd largest client. You can't afford to alienate her." Charlotte waved off his protest. "It's fine. I understand the position you're in. That's not why I asked to meet." "Then why?" I want to show you something, an opportunity. She pulled out a slim leather portfolio, borrowed from Alexander, who'd insisted she needed to look professional. She accepted the portfolio with visible reluctance. Charlotte, I'm not sure. Just look, please. He opened it. Inside was the Dubai prospectus, beautifully bound, with glossy photos of the Palm Jumeirah and architectural renderings of the proposed development. The numbers were spectacular, projected returns that would make any investor salivate. Charlotte watched him read, watched his skepticism war with his greed. Thomas was a good man, generally speaking, but he was also a venture capitalist. He couldn't help but calculate.
"This is remarkable," he said finally, "but Dubai is risky. The market's been volatile, and with the oil prices, which is exactly why the opportunity exists. Everyone's pulling out, so property values are depressed. This development locks in at pre-construction prices with guaranteed buyback options if the market doesn't recover. It's risk mitigated." Charlotte leaned forward. "I've been working on this for 2 years. It was supposed to be my first independent venture after your grandmother passed. After I was supposed to inherit the resources to make it happen." Charlotte let bitterness creep into her voice. "Not difficult, given the circumstances. Now I'm trying to scrape together enough investors to move forward without institutional backing. I have 3 million committed so far. I need 10 to make the first phase viable." Thomas flipped through more pages, his interest clearly piqued despite himself. "Who's your development partner?" "Al Rashid Holdings. They're based in Abu Dhabi, but they've done projects throughout the Emirates. Impeccable reputation." Charlotte had spent weeks researching legitimate companies, finding ones that were real enough to pass surface-level vetting, but obscure enough that no one would call them directly. All the documentation is in there: corporate registrations, past projects, financial statements. "I'd need to vet this thoroughly." "Of course, I wouldn't expect anything less." Charlotte sat back. "I'm not asking you to invest blind. Do your due diligence, talk to your contacts in the region. Everything checks out, I promise you." Because it would. That was the beauty of the trap. Every piece of it was designed to pass inspection. Only someone who dug 3 levels deep, who pulled the actual building permits from Dubai's archives, who called the supposed investors and asked the right questions, would find the gaps. And by the time anyone dug that deep, it would be far too late. Thomas closed the portfolio but didn't hand it back. "What's your involvement?" "I'm coordinating the investment group. Once we hit the threshold, I'll be taking a seat on the development board, overseeing the project, ensuring it stays on timeline and budget." She paused. "It's a chance to rebuild, Thomas, to prove that I'm not what Vivian says I am, that I can still execute at this level." "This isn't desperation making you sloppy?" The question was pointed, necessary. Charlotte let hurt flash across her face before locking it down. "If you think I'm that far gone, then don't invest. I'm not asking for charity. I'm offering an opportunity to people who still trust my judgment." Thomas grimaced. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did. And that's fine. I'd question me too." Charlotte stood, leaving the portfolio on the table. "Keep that. Review it. If you know anyone who might be interested, pass it along. If not, I understand." She made it 3 steps before Thomas called after her. "Charlotte?" She turned back. "I'll look at it. No promises, but I'll look." He hesitated. "And for what it's worth, I don't believe what Vivian's saying. I think you got screwed, and I think you're trying to make the best of a bad situation." "Thank you," Charlotte said, and meant it. Thomas was a good man. She almost felt bad about using him. Almost. The performance continued over the next 2 weeks. Charlotte met with 6 other potential investors, all carefully selected from the periphery of Vivian's circle. She pitched the Dubai deal with the right mix of desperation and competence, like a woman trying to convince herself as much as her audience. Most declined. 2 expressed cautious interest. One, predictably, was Robert Morrison, who'd made his fortune in commercial real estate and couldn't resist the allure of Middle Eastern development. He committed $500,000 on the spot. Charlotte took his money, deposited it in the escrow account Alexander had set up, and waited. On Wednesday afternoon, 2 weeks after her lunch with Thomas, her phone rang.
Unknown number. Charlotte Ashford? Ms. Ashford, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm calling on behalf of an investor who's interested in your Dubai project. Would you be available for a meeting? Charlotte's heart rate didn't change. She'd been expecting this. Of course, when would be convenient? Tomorrow, if possible, 2 p.m. at the Four Seasons. My client prefers to keep initial consultations private. Not a problem. Should I bring the full prospectus? That would be helpful. Thank you. The line clicked dead. Charlotte immediately called Alexander. She bet. Are you sure it's her? Jennifer Walsh is Vivian's personal assistant. She's using her for plausible deniability, but yes, it's her. Charlotte was pacing now, energy flooding her system. She took the bait. Then it's time for phase 2. Alexander's voice carried a dark satisfaction. I'll have the amended documents ready by tomorrow morning. Everything she'll need to dig herself deeper. What about the accounts? Already structured. The moment she wires her investment, every transaction will be traceable. The money will filter through 3 shell companies before landing in what appears to be the Al Rashid Holdings account. She'll see her name nowhere in the initial paperwork, but the forensic trail will lead straight back to her authorization. And when the deal collapses? When the deal collapses, she'll have committed fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and wire fraud. The evidence will be scattered across 4 jurisdictions, all pointing back to her authorization. Alexander paused. Are you ready for this? Once she's in, there's no pulling her back out. This ends with her in prison or you in prison. No middle ground. Charlotte thought about grandmother's ledger, about the 20 years of crimes Vivian had committed without consequence, about standing in the rain while her life was thrown from the balcony. I'm ready, Charlotte said. Make sure the documents are perfect. They will be. Alexander hesitated. Charlotte? Yes? When this is over, when she's been arrested and charged and convicted, what then? What do you do with the rest of your life after you've spent months destroying someone? Charlotte looked around her tiny apartment, at the water-stained ceiling and the broken desk that started everything. I become someone who can't be destroyed, someone who understands that power isn't about what you have, it's about what people believe you can take away. She ended the call and spent the rest of the evening preparing for her meeting with Jennifer Walsh. By the time the sun rose the next morning, Charlotte Ashford had her armor on, her weapons loaded, and her target in sight. Vivian didn't know it yet, but the war had already been won. Now came the execution. The Four Seasons occupied the upper floors of a tower on Michigan Avenue, all glass and steel, and the kind of quiet luxury that didn't need to announce itself. Charlotte arrived 20 minutes early and spent the time in the lobby, watching. Old habits from her corporate strategist days. Never enter a meeting without understanding the terrain. Jennifer Walsh appeared at 1:55 p.m., precisely 5 minutes early. She was younger than Charlotte expected, maybe 26, dressed in what Charlotte recognized as this season's Max Mara. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she carried an iPad rather than a portfolio. Vivian was training her well. Always appear more modern, more efficient than your opponent. Ms. Ashford? She extended a hand. Thank you for making time on such short notice. Of course. Should we go up? The suite was on the 31st floor, a corner unit with views of the lake and the city. Tasteful, expensive, completely anonymous, the kind of place where deals were made that no one wanted traced. And waiting inside, of course, was Vivian. She'd changed her hair, highlighted now, professionally styled in waves that probably cost more than Charlotte's monthly rent. She wore Chanel, head to toe, and when she smiled, it was the smile of a woman who'd won and knew it. Charlotte, what a pleasant surprise. Vivian didn't stand, didn't offer a hand. Jennifer, you didn't mention Ms. Ashford was the project coordinator. You didn't ask, Charlotte said pleasantly, setting her portfolio on the table. But I'm glad you're the interested party. I was hoping we could do business together. Family, after all. Vivian's smile flickered for just a moment. Yes, family. She gestured to the chair across from her. Please, sit. Tell me about this Dubai opportunity. Thomas Chen's been talking about it at the club. He seemed quite excited. Of course he had. Charlotte had been counting on it. It's a unique situation. The Emirates market is depressed right now due to oil volatility, which means property values are at a 5-year low. Al Rashid Holdings has secured prime development rights on the Palm Jumeirah, 50 luxury units with full resort amenities. She pulled out the prospectus, the same one she'd shown Thomas, and walked Vivian through the numbers. The projected costs, the anticipated returns, the exit strategies. All of it carefully calculated to be simultaneously legitimate and too good to be true. Vivian listened, her expression neutral, but Charlotte could see the calculation in her eyes. She was already trying to figure out the angle, trying to determine if this was a genuine opportunity or a trap. Good, let her wonder. The documentation seems solid, Vivian said when Charlotte finished, but Dubai is risky. The political situation, the market volatility, the currency fluctuations. All mitigated by the contract structure. Al Rashid is guaranteeing buyback options at 80% of initial investment if certain performance thresholds aren't met. The risk is minimal. Nothing is minimal risk at these returns. Which is why I'm offering it to sophisticated investors who understand the market. Charlotte leaned back. If you're not interested, that's fine. I have other prospects. Vivian's eyes narrowed. How much have you raised so far? $3.5 million. I need 10 to hit the first phase threshold. And if you don't reach 10? Then the investment is returned, minus administrative costs. Charlotte paused. But I'll reach 10. Morrison's in for $500,000. Thomas is considering another $1 million, and I have 2 other groups reviewing the prospectus. None of that was technically false. Morrison had invested. Thomas was considering it. He'd said as much during their lunch. And Charlotte had sent the prospectus to 2 other people, even though she knew they'd decline. Vivian picked up the prospectus, flipped through it. I'll need to verify the company registration, the development permits, the partner credentials. Of course, I'd expect nothing less. And I'll want to speak with someone from Al Rashid directly. Charlotte had been ready for this. Their U.S. representative is David Chen. He's based in Los Angeles but travels frequently. I can arrange a call, but given the time difference with Abu Dhabi, it may take a few days. That's fine. Jennifer will coordinate. They spent another 30 minutes going through details, Vivian asking increasingly technical questions about the development timeline, the profit distribution model, the legal structure. Charlotte answered everything perfectly because Alexander had ensured every answer was documented, every detail backed by fabricated paperwork that would pass any initial vetting. Finally, Vivian set down the prospectus. I'm interested, potentially, but I'd want a larger stake than what you're offering. I'm only offering 5% stakes to individual investors. The rest is being held by the coordination group. I want 10%, and I want a seat on the oversight committee. Charlotte pretended to consider. That would require a $2 million investment. That's acceptable, Vivian smiled, assuming everything checks out. Of course. Charlotte gathered her materials. Have Jennifer coordinate with me once your due diligence is complete. If you're ready to proceed, I'll need the funds wired within 48 hours of commitment. The window for this development phase closes in 3 weeks. Creating urgency, creating opportunity. Charlotte stood. This is a legitimate deal, Vivian. I know you don't trust me right now. I wouldn't trust me either, given how you've positioned me in the market. But the numbers speak for themselves. Do your homework. You'll see. She left without waiting for a response, rode the elevator down, and walked 3 blocks before finally allowing herself to breathe. Her phone rang before she'd reached her car. Alexander. How'd it go? She's in, or she will be once she vets everything. She'll find exactly what we want her to find. The company registrations are solid. The permits are filed with Dubai authorities. David Chen is a real person with a real history in development. He's just never heard of this project. What if she calls him? She won't. The prospectus lists him as a consultant, not a principal, and consultants don't take cold calls from potential investors. She'll verify his credentials, see that he's legitimate, and assume the connection is valid. Alexander's voice carried satisfaction. This is good work, Charlotte. Sophisticated. She's walking into this with her eyes open, which makes it even better when the trap closes. Charlotte unlocked her car but didn't get in. When do we move to phase 3? After she wires the money. Once those funds are in the escrow account, she's committed fraud. Everything after that is just building the case. And the FBI? I have a contact, former colleague who moved to financial crimes. He owes me a favor, and more importantly, he hates corruption. Once we have evidence of embezzlement from the Ashford estate, he'll open an investigation. Charlotte finally climbed into her car, hands steady on the wheel. How long? 6 months, maybe 8. We need to let her get comfortable, let her believe she's gotten away with it, let her make mistakes. Alexander paused. Can you wait that long? Charlotte thought about Vivian's smile, about the suite at the Four Seasons, about the Chanel suit that cost more than 3 months of Charlotte's rent. I can wait, she said. I've gotten good at it. Jennifer Walsh called 4 days later. Miss Ashford, we've completed our preliminary review. My client would like to move forward. Charlotte had been waiting for this, sitting in her apartment with the black ledger open in front of her, reading grandmother's entries about patience and strategy. That's excellent news. What questions can I answer? None at the moment. We'd like to schedule the wire transfer for Monday, $2 million as discussed. In return, we'll need the 10% stake documentation and the seat on the oversight committee. Of course, I'll have my attorney draw up the paperwork. Your attorney? Jennifer's voice carried the slightest hint of skepticism. Alexander Sterling. He's handling the legal structure for the investment group. Charlotte delivered the name casually, waited for the reaction. There was a pause. Then, I see. I'll need to verify his credentials. Please do. He's very qualified. Charlotte smiled at her empty apartment. I'm sure you'll find his background interesting. After Jennifer hung up, Charlotte immediately called Alexander. She's doing due diligence on you. Expected, she'll find I was disbarred, that I lost my firm, that I've been operating as a consultant. She'll see it as a weakness. You're working with a disgraced attorney because you can't afford anyone better. Will she connect it to her? Not unless she's smart enough to review her own history. The Carmichael case was sealed. My disbarment records are public, but they don't mention the Ashford Corporation by name. Alexander's voice carried dark amusement. She'll see what she expects to see, a desperate woman making poor decisions. Perfect. Charlotte closed the ledger. The wire transfer is scheduled for Monday. Once that money moves, there's no pulling it back. Then Monday is when Vivian Ashford begins her very expensive journey toward federal prison. Charlotte ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness of her apartment, thinking about trajectories and consequences and the strange mathematics of revenge. Vivian had stolen $50 million and called it inheritance. Charlotte wasn't stealing anything. She was simply ensuring that Vivian stole from herself. There was a poetry to that, a symmetry. Grandmother would have appreciated it. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of Chicago weather that suggested winter was coming early. Charlotte woke at 5 a.m., unable to sleep, and spent 2 hours reviewing every document, every detail of the fabricated Dubai deal. Alexander had done exceptional work. The paper trail was pristine, the forgeries perfect. At 9:47 a.m., her phone pinged with a notification from the escrow account. Transfer received, $2 million from Ashford Properties, LLC. Charlotte stared at the screen, her coffee growing cold in her hand. $2 million. Vivian had actually done it. She'd wired money from an Ashford Corporation subsidiary, probably rationalizing it as a legitimate investment opportunity, never realizing that every keystroke had been documented, every authorization logged. The money sat in an account designed to look legitimate, proper paperwork, proper registration, even a proper website for the non-existent Al Rashid Holdings. But beneath the surface, the account was structured to create an evidence trail that would be admissible in court. Every transaction would be traceable. Every movement of funds would demonstrate intent. Vivian had just committed embezzlement. Charlotte called Alexander, her voice steady. It's done. I see it. $2 million from Ashford Properties. She used a subsidiary to hide the source, but the forensic accounting will trace it back to the main estate accounts. He sounded almost impressed. She's good at this. She's been doing it for years. That's what the ledger says. She's been skimming from various accounts since 2010, always in amounts small enough to hide in operational budgets. This is different. This is obvious, overt. Why? Because you made her greedy. You offered returns too good to pass up, and you made her believe she'd found something you were trying to hide from her. She thinks she's stealing your opportunity. Charlotte moved to the window, looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Vivian was probably celebrating, congratulating herself on another successful theft. What's next? Now we let it sit. We let her believe she's gotten away with it. In the meantime, I start building the case file. I'll pull together all of grandmother's documentation, create a timeline of Vivian's crimes going back 15 years. By the time we approach the FBI, I'll have a complete picture of her fraud. How long? 3 months minimum. 6 is better. We need to give her time to make mistakes, to move more money around, to cover her tracks in ways that create more evidence. Alexander paused. Can you hold out that long? Financially, I mean. Charlotte looked around her apartment. The heat was working again, finally, but the water stains remained. Her savings were down to $400. She'd sold everything of value except the clothes on her back and grandmother's desk. I'll manage, she said. I can advance you more from the retainer. No, I need you focused on the case. I'll find work, something temporary. Charlotte? I'll manage, she repeated, firmer this time. Just make sure the case is airtight. Make sure that when we finally move, she has nowhere to run. After ending the call, Charlotte spent an hour updating her resume, removing any mention of the Ashford Corporation, focusing instead on her earlier work with various consulting firms. She applied to 12 positions, administrative work, project coordination, nothing prestigious, just something to keep the lights on while Alexander built their case. The irony wasn't lost on her. Vivian was living in a mansion, spending money she'd stolen, while Charlotte was applying for jobs she was overqualified for by a factor of 10. But that was temporary. 6 months, maybe 8, and everything would invert. She could wait. The months crawled past with the kind of grinding monotony that Charlotte had never experienced before. She found work at a consulting firm called Meridian Associates, doing project coordination for $45,000 a year, less than half what she'd been making at the Ashford Corporation. The work was mind-numbing, tracking spreadsheets and scheduling meetings, but it kept her fed and housed. She lived simply, ramen and rice, one meal out per week, always cheap. She canceled her gym membership, ran in the park instead. She stopped getting her hair done professionally, learned to trim it herself. Every dollar saved was a dollar that could be used for the case. Alexander worked methodically, building a file that grew thicker each week. He'd contacted old colleagues, reconstructed the Carmichael case, pulled documentation from sealed records, taken grandmother's ledger and transformed it into a prosecutable narrative, complete with forensic accounting analysis and timeline correlations. It's remarkable, he told Charlotte during one of their monthly meetings. She's been running the same scheme for 15 years. Small thefts from operating budgets, always below the threshold that would trigger automatic audits. She'd move money between subsidiaries, create false invoices, pay herself consulting fees for services never rendered. It's sophisticated enough to avoid casual detection, but sloppy enough to leave a paper trail if anyone knew where to look. And no one looked? No one had a reason to. She was family, she was trusted, and she was careful enough to not be obvious about it. Until Dubai. Dubai was greed. That's the difference between a career criminal and someone who gets caught. Criminals know when to stop. Vivian never learned that lesson. Charlotte studied the documents, seeing the pattern emerge. $42 million stolen over 15 years, small amounts, usually under $500,000 per year, always disguised as legitimate business expenses. When do we approach the FBI? I'm thinking April. That gives us 6 months from the wire transfer, which is enough time to establish pattern of behavior. I've also been tracking her spending. She's using the Dubai money to cover personal expenses, which creates more evidence of embezzlement. How do you know what she's spending? Alexander smiled slightly. I have a friend at her bank, not someone who will testify, but someone who can point me towards public records, credit card statements, property transfers, large purchases, all legally obtainable information if you know where to look. That's, Alexander interrupted, completely legal. I'm not hacking anything, I'm not bribing anyone, I'm just very good at finding public information that most people don't know exists. Charlotte nodded slowly. What about grandmother's will? The real one? That's our opening gambit. We present the real will, along with evidence that Vivian coerced grandmother into signing the false one when she was medicated. That establishes a pattern of fraud and gives the FBI reason to look deeper. He pulled out another folder. I've got Dr. Harrison's medication logs, Nurse Pembroke's shift reports, everything showing that grandmother was heavily sedated during the period when the false will was signed. Combined with grandmother's own documentation of the coercion, it's compelling evidence of fraud. Will it be enough to invalidate the will? In probate court, absolutely. Combined with everything else, Vivian won't just lose the inheritance, she'll lose everything. The estate will be frozen, her assets seized, and she'll be facing federal charges that carry minimum sentences of 15 years. 15 years. Charlotte thought about that number. Vivian was 32 now. 15 years would make her 47 when she gets out, assuming she serves the minimum. Her entire life destroyed. Good. In February, 4 months after the wire transfer, Charlotte's phone rang during her lunch break. Unknown number. Charlotte Ashford. Ms. Ashford, this is Jennifer Walsh. Vivian's assistant sounded tense. I need to speak with you about the Dubai project. Charlotte's pulse quickened, but her voice remained calm. Of course. What can I help you with? We've been trying to reach David Chen for 3 weeks. He's not responding to calls or emails. We need an update on the development timeline. I see. That is unusual. Charlotte made her voice concerned. Let me reach out to the Al Rashid main office. Sometimes the U.S. representatives get pulled back to Abu Dhabi for extended periods. I'll get you an update within 48 hours. Ms. Ashford, my client is getting concerned. The development was supposed to break ground last month according to the prospectus timeline. Delays are common in international development, permit issues, contractor scheduling, local regulatory requirements. I'm sure it's nothing serious, but I'll investigate and get back to you. She ended the call and immediately contacted Alexander. Vivian's getting nervous. Good. Let her sweat. Alexander's voice carried dark satisfaction. Don't give her too much information. String her along. Let her worry. What if she pulls out, demands her money back? She can't. The escrow terms are clear. Once the funds are transferred, they're committed to the development. If she tries to withdraw, she'll have to provide legal justification, which means explaining why she invested Ashford Corporation money in a personal venture. He paused. She's trapped. She just doesn't know it yet. Charlotte did call Jennifer back 48 hours later, as promised. I spoke with the Al Rashid office. David Chen has been dealing with a family emergency and will be back in contact next week. The development is experiencing standard permitting delays, but they expect to break ground by end of March. Jennifer's relief was audible. Thank you, my client will be pleased. But Vivian wouldn't be pleased for long, because there would be no groundbreaking in March. There would be no development at all. Just a slow unraveling as the beautiful facade of the Dubai deal began to crack, and Vivian realized she'd invested $2 million in smoke and mirrors. By April, when Alexander finally approached the FBI, Vivian would be desperate, making mistakes, trying to cover her tracks in ways that would only incriminate her further. And Charlotte would be watching from the shadows, patient and cold, and absolutely merciless, just like grandmother had taught her. March arrived with false spring weather, warm enough to fool the daffodils, cold enough to kill them 3 days later. Charlotte found the metaphor appropriate. Jennifer Walsh's calls had become weekly, then daily. Each time, Charlotte provided carefully crafted excuses: supply chain issues, contractor disputes, regulatory delays, the kind of problems that were common enough in international development to be believable, but significant enough to be concerning. By mid-March, Vivian had stopped using Jennifer as intermediary. Charlotte, Vivian's voice on the phone carried none of its usual polish. "We need to meet. Today. I'm at work. I don't care. This is about Dubai, and we need to talk. Now." They met at a coffee shop in the Loop, neutral territory. Vivian arrived looking uncharacteristically disheveled, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her makeup imperfect. She'd lost weight, Charlotte noticed. Stress weight, the kind that came from sleepless nights and constant worry. "I want my money back," Vivian said without preamble. "The development is clearly not happening. I want the $2 million returned to my account within 48 hours. Charlotte sipped her coffee calmly. "That's not how escrow works. The funds are committed to the project. If you want to withdraw, you'll need to provide legal justification." Legal justification? The development was supposed to start 2 months ago. There's been no progress, no permits filed, no contractors hired, nothing. Vivian leaned forward, her voice dropping. "I had my people look into Al Rashid Holdings. They exist, yes, but they have no record of any Palm Jumeirah development, no permits filed with Dubai authorities, no property acquisition registered. Development details are often confidential until permits are finalized. Don't." Vivian's eyes were cold. "Don't treat me like I'm stupid. I know what you've done. This whole thing is fake. You created a shell deal to lure investors, probably to make back what you lost from the inheritance." Charlotte set down her coffee, meeting Vivian's glare with perfect calm. "If you believe this is fraud, report it. File charges, get lawyers involved. That's what I'm planning to do." "Good. Make sure to explain to those lawyers where your $2 million came from, which Ashford Corporation account you embezzled it from, how you authorized using estate funds for a personal investment." Charlotte's smile was cold. "Because that's going to come up in discovery." Vivian went very still. "What are you talking about?" "Ashford Properties, LLC. That's the entity you used for the wire transfer. Ashford Properties is a subsidiary of the Ashford Corporation, which is owned by the estate. You used estate money for a personal investment. That's embezzlement. Of course, you could claim it was a legitimate corporate investment opportunity, but then you'd need to explain why you didn't present it to the board, why there's no investment committee approval, why the only documentation is in your personal files." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Charlotte pulled out her phone, scrolled to a screenshot, and turned it towards Vivian. "That's the wire transfer receipt. Note the account number. That's an estate account, Vivian. You stole $2 million from grandmother's estate to invest in what you thought was my fraudulent scheme." Charlotte set down her coffee, meeting Vivian's glare with perfect calm. "If Dubai is fraud, then you're an accomplice. If Dubai is legitimate, then you committed embezzlement. Either way, you're trapped." "You bitch!" Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. "You calculated this, all of it." "I learned from the best." Charlotte stood, gathering her coat. "You wanted to know what 28 years of devotion bought me? This. The knowledge that you're not as smart as you think you are, that you're sloppy and arrogant and predictable. I'll destroy you. I'll tell everyone you orchestrated this fraud. And I'll show them grandmother's ledger. 20 years of your crimes, documented in her own hand. $40 million stolen from the estate through fake invoices, fraudulent expenses, embezzled funds. Dubai isn't the crime. Dubai is just the one that's finally going to get you caught." Charlotte walked out, leaving Vivian frozen at the table. She made it half a block before her hands started shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. It was done. The confession had been made, the trap sprung. Now came the final act. March arrived with false spring weather, warm enough to fool the daffodils, cold enough to kill them 3 days later. Charlotte found the metaphor appropriate. Jennifer Walsh's calls had become weekly, then daily. Each time, Charlotte provided carefully crafted excuses: supply chain issues, contractor disputes, regulatory delays. The kind of problems that were common enough in international development to be believable, but significant enough to be concerning. By mid-March, Vivian had stopped using Jennifer as intermediary. "Charlotte." Vivian's voice on the phone carried none of its usual polish. "We need to meet. Today. I'm at work. I don't care. This is about Dubai, and we need to talk. Now." They met at a coffee shop in the Loop, neutral territory. Vivian arrived looking uncharacteristically disheveled, her hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her makeup imperfect. She'd lost weight, Charlotte noticed. Stress weight, the kind that came from sleepless nights and constant worry. "I want my money back," Vivian said without preamble. "The development is clearly not happening. I want the $2 million returned to my account within 48 hours. Charlotte sipped her coffee calmly. "That's not how escrow works. The funds are committed to the project. If you want to withdraw, you'll need to provide legal justification." "Legal justification? The development was supposed to start 2 months ago. There's been no progress, no permits filed, no contractors hired, nothing." Vivian leaned forward, her voice dropping. "I had my people look into Al Rashid Holdings. They exist, yes, but they have no record of any Palm Jumeirah development, no permits filed with Dubai authorities, no property acquisition registered. Development details are often confidential until permits are finalized. Don't." Vivian's eyes were cold. "Don't treat me like I'm stupid. I know what you've done. This whole thing is fake. You created a shell deal to lure investors, probably to make back what you lost from the inheritance." Charlotte set down her coffee, meeting Vivian's glare with perfect calm. "If you believe this is fraud, report it. File charges, get lawyers involved. That's what I'm planning to do." "Good. Make sure to explain to those lawyers where your $2 million came from, which Ashford Corporation account you embezzled it from, how you authorized using estate funds for a personal investment." Charlotte's smile was cold. "Because that's going to come up in discovery." Vivian went very still. "What are you talking about?" "Ashford Properties, LLC. That's the entity you used for the wire transfer. Ashford Properties is a subsidiary of the Ashford Corporation, which is owned by the estate. You used estate money for a personal investment. That's embezzlement. Of course, you could claim it was a legitimate corporate investment opportunity, but then you'd need to explain why you didn't present it to the board, why there's no investment committee approval, why the only documentation is in your personal files. You're bluffing." "Am I?" Charlotte pulled out her phone, scrolled to a screenshot, and turned it towards Vivian. "That's the wire transfer receipt. Note the account number. That's an estate account, Vivian. You stole $2 million from grandmother's estate to invest in what you thought was my fraudulent scheme." Charlotte set down her coffee, meeting Vivian's glare with perfect calm. "If Dubai is fraud, then you're an accomplice. If Dubai is legitimate, then you committed embezzlement. Either way, you're trapped." "You bitch!" Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. "You calculated this, all of it." "I learned from the best." Charlotte stood, gathering her coat. "You wanted to know what 28 years of devotion bought me? This. The knowledge that you're not as smart as you think you are, that you're sloppy and arrogant and predictable. I'll destroy you. I'll tell everyone you orchestrated this fraud. And I'll show them grandmother's ledger. 20 years of your crimes, documented in her own hand. $40 million stolen from the estate through fake invoices, fraudulent expenses, embezzled funds." "Dubai isn't the crime, Vivian. Dubai is just the one that's finally going to get you caught." Charlotte walked out, leaving Vivian frozen at the table. She made it half a block before her hands started shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. It was done. The confession had been made, the trap sprung. Now came the final act. Alexander filed the motion to invalidate grandmother's will on March 27th. The filing included grandmother's real will, her medical records, and extensive documentation of coercion and medication tampering. The probate court scheduled an emergency hearing for April 15th. 2 days after the filing, FBI Special Agent Michael Torres received an anonymous tip regarding financial irregularities at the Ashford Corporation. The tip included a USB drive containing the Black Ledger, documentation of the Dubai investment, and a complete forensic analysis of 15 years of embezzlement. Torres, who'd spent 20 years investigating financial crimes, had seen his share of elaborate fraud schemes. But this was something else. This was comprehensive, meticulous, and completely devastating. He opened his investigation on April 2nd. On April 3rd, federal agents arrived at Ashford Manor with a warrant to seize financial records. Charlotte learned about it from the news, watching from her apartment as cameras captured Vivian being led out of the manor in handcuffs. The charges were extensive: embezzlement, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and falsification of legal documents. Her phone rang. Alexander. "Are you watching?" "Yes." Charlotte's voice was steady, but her eyes were fixed on the screen, watching Vivian's face. The shock, the fear, the desperate awareness that everything had collapsed. "Torres is good. He moved fast once he saw the evidence. Vivian's accounts are frozen, her assets are being seized, and the Ashford Corporation Board has voted to remove her from all positions pending investigation." "What about the will?" "Probate hearing is still scheduled for the 15th, but it's a formality now. With the criminal charges filed, Vivian can't contest the invalidation. The estate will be unfrozen once the court rules, which means you'll have access to your inheritance." Inheritance. The word felt foreign now. Charlotte wasn't sure she wanted it anymore. The money felt tainted, stained by Vivian's crimes and her own calculated revenge. What happens to her? Federal prosecutor is talking minimum 15 years, possibly more depending on how much additional fraud they uncovered during the investigation. With good behavior, maybe she serves 10, maybe. Alexander paused. "You did it, Charlotte. You destroyed her completely." Charlotte watched the screen as Vivian was placed in the back of an FBI vehicle. Their eyes met for just a moment, Vivian looking out, Charlotte looking in. And Charlotte saw the exact moment her cousin understood that this hadn't been luck or coincidence or legal justice. This had been orchestrated, calculated, executed with surgical precision. This had been Charlotte. "I need to go," Charlotte said quietly. "Wait, don't you want to celebrate? We won. This is what we've been working toward for 6 months." "I know." Charlotte ended the call. She turned off the television and sat in the silence of her apartment, feeling nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, no relief, just emptiness. Grandmother had been right about power. It wasn't what you had, it was what people believed you had. But Grandmother had been wrong about one thing. Power had a cost, and Charlotte was only just beginning to understand how expensive it truly was. 6 months later, the Ashford Manor had been restored to something approaching its former glory. The investigation had concluded, the assets had been returned, and the estate, all $52 million of it, belonged to Charlotte. She'd offered to pay Alexander his 20% as promised. He declined, settling instead for a flat fee that covered his expenses and enough to rebuild his practice. "The satisfaction was payment enough," he'd said. "Watching her realize what you'd done, that was worth more than money." Charlotte had used some of the funds to settle Grandmother's debts, to clean up the financial mess Vivian had created. The rest sat in accounts she barely touched, money she couldn't bring herself to spend. The Ashford Corporation's board had asked her to take over as CEO. She'd declined. She had no interest in running the company her cousin had corrupted. Instead, she'd quietly sold her shares and established a foundation in Grandmother's name, one that provided legal support for people who'd been defrauded by family members, like Marcus, whose daughter was now attending Northwestern on a full scholarship funded by Charlotte personally. But tonight was different. Tonight was the annual Ashford Charity Gala, an event Grandmother had hosted for 30 years. Charlotte had debated canceling it, but Alexander had convinced her otherwise. "You need to be seen," he'd said. "You need to show Chicago society that you survived, that you rebuilt, that you're stronger than what Vivian tried to do to you." So Charlotte had planned the gala, though her version was different from the ostentatious affairs Vivian had hosted. Smaller guest list, quieter elegance, all proceeds going to the foundation. She wore black, simple, severe, expensive. Her hair was professionally styled for the first time in months. She wore grandmother's pearls, the only piece of jewelry she'd kept. The guests arrived at 7, filling the manor with careful conversation and expensive wine. They were curious, Charlotte knew, wondering what she'd do, how she'd act, whether she'd be bitter or magnanimous. She was neither. She was simply present, moving through the crowd with practiced grace, thanking donors, directing attention to the foundation's work. At 8:30, she stepped to the small stage that had been erected in the ballroom. The crowd quieted, glasses pausing mid-sip. "Thank you all for coming," Charlotte began, her voice carrying across the room. "This gala has been a tradition for 3 decades, hosted by my grandmother, Eleanor Ashford. She believed that those who have much owe much, that privilege comes with responsibility." She paused, meeting eyes across the crowd. Thomas Chen was there, looking uncomfortable. Robert Morrison, who'd lost his $500,000 investment in Dubai, studied her with guarded respect. Jennifer Walsh, who'd found new employment after Vivian's arrest, avoided her gaze entirely. My grandmother also believed in justice, not the kind delivered by courts, though that has its place, but the kind that comes from standing up to those who abuse power, who take what doesn't belong to them, who hurt others for personal gain. The room was absolutely silent now. "Many of you know what happened this year, what my cousin did, the fraud, the theft, the manipulation. Some of you were her victims. Some of you stood by and said nothing. Some of you helped her, whether you knew it or not." Charlotte let that hang in the air for a moment. "I'm not here to assign blame or demand apologies. I'm here to tell you that grandmother left me more than money. She left me a lesson about power, real power, not the kind you can buy or steal, but the kind you build through patience, through strategy, through understanding that justice delayed is not justice denied." She gestured to the screens behind her, which had been dark until now. They flickered to life, showing not the foundation's promotional material, but something else entirely. Grandmother's face, recorded 2 months before her death during one of her lucid periods. "My dear friends, if you're watching this, it means Charlotte has succeeded. It means Vivian has been stopped. And it means you all need to understand something. I knew what she was doing, I documented everything, and I chose Charlotte not because she was family, but because she had the intelligence and the courage to finish what I started." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. "Some of you will wonder if this was fair, if Charlotte's methods were justified. Let me answer that question. Vivian spent 15 years stealing from me, from my family, from the partners and employees of this company. She drugged me, manipulated me, forged documents, and destroyed lives. Charlotte simply returned the favor." Grandmother smiled on the screen, and it was not a kind expression. So if you're uncomfortable with what happened, ask yourself this: where was your discomfort when Vivian was the one doing the stealing? Where were your questions then? The video ended. The screens went dark. Charlotte looked out at the crowd. "The foundation is accepting donations. All of it will go to helping people rebuild after they've been victimized by the kind of fraud Vivian committed. Thank you for coming." She stepped down from the stage to absolute silence. Then slowly, applause began. Not enthusiastic, not celebratory, but acknowledging, respectful. Charlotte moved through the crowd, accepting their cautious congratulations, fielding their careful questions. She was polite, professional, completely unreachable. At 10:30, she found herself on the balcony, the same balcony where Vivian had laughed as Charlotte's belongings were thrown into the rain. The night was cold, the city spread out below like a map of conquests and failures. "Hell of a speech," Alexander joined her, holding 2 glasses of champagne. Grandmother would have approved. Would she? Charlotte accepted the glass but didn't drink. "I'm not sure anymore. This whole thing, the revenge, the destruction, the perfect execution, it worked. Vivian's in prison. I have the inheritance. Justice was served. She turned to him. So why do I feel like I lost something? Alexander considered that. Because you did. You lost your innocence, maybe, your belief that doing the right thing matters, your trust in family, in institutions, in the idea that good people win and bad people lose. That's a lot to lose. It is, but you gained something too. What? Knowledge, power, the understanding that you're capable of more than you believed, that you can survive anything, endure anything, destroy anything. He raised his glass. Whether that's a blessing or a curse depends on what you do with it. Charlotte finally sipped the champagne. It was excellent, Dom Perignon, probably, the kind of wine that would have seemed decadent 6 months ago and now just tasted like carbonated regret. I got a letter last week from Vivian, from prison. What did it say? That she understood now, that she'd underestimated me, that if she'd known I had grandmother's ledger, she would have killed me instead of just stealing from me. Charlotte's voice was absolutely level. She's not apologizing, she's just acknowledging that I won. Are you going to respond? No. Charlotte set down the glass. There's nothing left to say. She's exactly where she belongs, and I'm exactly where I fought to be. The story's over. Is it? Alexander studied her. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're just getting started. The foundation, the work you're doing, the people you're helping, that's not an ending, that's a new chapter. Maybe he was right. Maybe the story wasn't over, just changing shape. But Charlotte couldn't shake the feeling that in destroying Vivian, she'd also destroyed something in herself, the part that believed in fairness, in honest work, in the idea that loyalty and devotion would be rewarded. Grandmother's lesson was clear. Power is not what you have, it's what people believe you have. Charlotte had power now, real power, the kind that made people careful around her, that made them watch their words and guard their intentions. She just wasn't sure if she wanted it anymore.
The preliminary hearing for Vivian's trial was scheduled for November, 15 months after her arrest. Charlotte had been subpoenaed to testify, though her testimony would be limited to the will forgery and medication tampering. The Dubai scheme, the embezzlement, the money laundering, all of that stood on its own evidence. Charlotte arrived at the federal courthouse on a gray Tuesday morning, dressed in a charcoal suit that struck the balance between professional and understated. She'd considered wearing something more dramatic, a power suit perhaps, or something in Ashford red, but decided against it. This wasn't about theater. This was about truth. The courtroom was modern, all blonde wood and recessed lighting. Vivian sat at the defense table, flanked by 2 attorneys who looked expensive but overmatched. She'd aged in prison, her skin sallow, her hair showing gray roots, her designer wardrobe replaced by an orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion. Their eyes met as Charlotte entered. Vivian's expression was unreadable. No anger, no plea for sympathy, just cold assessment. Calculating, even now, whether there was an angle she'd missed. Charlotte was called to the stand at 10:15. She took the oath, sat, and folded her hands in her lap exactly the way grandmother had taught her. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer O'Coffer, began with simple questions. Charlotte's relationship to the defendant, her relationship to Eleanor Ashford, her knowledge of the estate. Then came the will. Ms. Ashford, when did you first learn that your grandmother's will had been changed? At the reading, 3 months after her death. I was informed that the estate would go entirely to Vivian, with the exception of a single piece of furniture. Were you surprised by this? Yes, my grandmother had promised me that everything was arranged, that my years of service to the family wouldn't go unrewarded. Was she been specific about what arranged meant? She told me I would inherit the estate, that Vivian was blood, but I was the one who had earned it. When did she tell you this? Multiple times over the years.
The last time was 3 days before she lost mental clarity due to medication increases. Okafor pulled out documentation, Dr. Harrison's logs, the medication timeline, grandmother's own notes. Charlotte confirmed each piece, her voice steady and factual. She explained about the desk, about the black ledger, about discovering the evidence of fraud. "And what did you do with this evidence?" "I brought it to an attorney, Alexander Sterling. We reviewed it together and determined that it demonstrated a pattern of fraud extending back 15 years. "Did you know at that time that Mr. Sterling had been previously employed by the Ashford Corporation?" "I did. I chose him specifically because he understood how Vivian operated, how she manipulated records, how she covered her tracks." Vivian's attorney objected, leading the witness, but was overruled. The questioning continued for 90 minutes. Charlotte remained calm, precise, offering nothing beyond what was asked. She was a witness, not an advocate. The evidence spoke for itself. Finally, Okafor asked, "Ms. Ashford, do you believe your cousin deliberately defrauded your grandmother?" Charlotte looked directly at Vivian. "Yes. I believe she spent 15 years stealing from my grandmother, from the family business, from everyone who trusted her. I believe she forged the will, that she manipulated grandmother's medication to make her compliant, and that she would have continued stealing if she hadn't been caught." "And the Dubai investment?" "I believe she saw an opportunity to make what she thought was easy money and didn't bother to verify the legitimacy because she was too arrogant to believe anyone could manipulate her the way she'd manipulated others." Vivian's attorney shot to his feet. "Objection. The witness is speculating about my client's mental state." "Sustained," the judge said. "Ms. Ashford, please limit yourself to facts, not interpretations." Charlotte nodded. "I apologize, Your Honor." The cross-examination was brutal but expected. Vivian's attorney tried to paint Charlotte as vindictive, as someone who'd fabricated evidence out of bitterness over losing the inheritance. He suggested she'd orchestrated the Dubai scheme specifically to entrap Vivian, that the whole thing was a conspiracy. Charlotte responded calmly to each insinuation. "I offered an investment opportunity. Your client chose to participate using stolen funds. If that was entrapment, she entrapped herself. You've admitted you wanted revenge against my client. I wanted justice. There's a difference." "Is there? You deliberately created a fake investment to lure her into committing a crime." "I created an investment opportunity. Whether it was legitimate or not is irrelevant. Your client had no right to use estate funds for personal investments without board approval. That's embezzlement, regardless of the investment's validity." The attorney tried several more approaches, each meeting the same calm deflection. Charlotte had practiced this with Alexander, had anticipated every argument, every attack. She was unshakable. When she finally stepped down from the stand, she felt nothing. No triumph, no relief, just exhaustion. She left the courthouse without speaking to anyone, took a cab back to the manor, and spent the rest of the day in grandmother's study, staring at the black ledger that started it all. The trial concluded in February, 11 months after the preliminary hearing. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Vivian was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison with possibility of parole after 12. Her assets were completely seized: the manor, the investments, everything she'd accumulated through theft and fraud. It would all be distributed back to the estate, to the victims, to the people she'd harmed. Charlotte didn't attend the sentencing. She couldn't bring herself to watch the final humiliation, even though part of her, the part that had spent 6 months planning Vivian's destruction, wanted to see it. Instead, she was in London, meeting with Penderton Holdings about a consulting contract, real work this time, using her skills for something other than range. She learned about the sentence from a text from Alexander. 18 years. It's over. Charlotte read the message in her hotel room overlooking the Thames, and finally allowed herself to feel something. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just tired acceptance. It was over. The story that started with Rain and Finoininshin ended with justice and prison. Vivian had lost everything. Charlotte had won everything. And somehow, neither of them had really won at all. Charlotte Ashford stood at the window of her London office, watching rain slide down the glass. The office was modest by Ashford standards, 10th floor of a respectable building in Canary Wharf, functional rather than ostentatious. Her consulting firm had 15 employees now, specializing in corporate fraud detection. They did good work, important work. She'd never moved back to Chicago permanently. The manor had been sold. She couldn't bring herself to live there, not after everything. She kept an apartment in the city for when business required it, but London had become home. Distance helped. The foundation continued its work, now run by a professional staff. She sat on the board but wasn't involved in daily operations. It was better that way. Less personal, more effective. She'd heard about Vivian occasionally, reports from her parole hearings, which were routinely denied, requests for contact, which Charlotte ignored. Vivian would serve her full sentence probably, 18 years for destroying lives. It didn't feel like enough, but it never would. Alexander had rebuilt his practice as predicted. He'd gotten his license reinstated after testifying in a dozen fraud cases, becoming something of an expert witness on white-collar crime. They still talked occasionally, comparing notes on cases, sharing the dark humor of people who'd seen the worst of human nature. He asked her once, during a call 2 years ago, if she regretted it. The revenge, the calculated destruction, the cold precision of what they'd done. Charlotte considered the question carefully. She finally said, "I regret that it was necessary, but no, I don't regret doing it." Now, 5 years later, she wasn't sure that was still true. She'd accomplished everything she'd set out to do. Vivian was in prison, the inheritance had been recovered, justice had been served. Grandmother would have been proud.
But Charlotte had lost something in the process, something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was innocence. Maybe it was the belief that winning mattered more than how you won. Or maybe it was just the person she'd been before, the one who'd believed that loyalty and competence would be rewarded, that doing right was enough. That Charlotte was gone, dead as surely as if Vivian had killed her. What remained was someone harder, colder, someone who understood that power wasn't about what you had, it was about what people believed you could take away. Grandmother had taught her that lesson, Vivian had reinforced it, and Charlotte had perfected it. Her phone buzzed, a message from Marcus, whose daughter was graduating from Northwestern with honors. He'd sent a photo, a proud father and his brilliant daughter, smiling in front of the campus fountain. "Thank you," the message said, "for everything." Charlotte smiled slightly. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe the point wasn't the revenge or the justice or the cold satisfaction of watching an enemy fall. Maybe it was this, helping people rebuild, preventing others from becoming victims, using the power she'd gained for something other than destruction. Or maybe she was just trying to convince herself that the last 5 years had been about more than simple, calculated revenge. Either way, the story was finished. Vivian was in prison. Charlotte had survived. The Ashford legacy, whatever that meant now, belonged to her. She turned away from the window, back to her work, back to the cases waiting on her desk, people who needed help, companies that needed investigation, the endless fight against fraud and corruption, and people who believed they were above consequences. It was good work, important work. And if sometimes Charlotte Ashford woke at 3 a.m. thinking about rain and broken desks and the moment she decided to become something other than a victim, well, that was the cost of power, and she'd known going in that nothing worth having came free.
In the end, Vivian Ashford served 14 years of her 18-year sentence before dying of a stroke at age 46. She never admitted guilt, never apologized, never broke. Charlotte Ashford never visited her in prison, never responded to her letters, never looked back. Some stories don't have clean endings. They just end. And the survivors move forward, carrying the weight of what they've done, trying to build something meaningful from the ruins of revenge. Grandmother's desk still sits in Charlotte's London apartment, carefully restored, its hidden drawer now empty. The black ledger is in a safe deposit box in Chicago, held as evidence in perpetuity. And somewhere in a federal prison, Vivian Ashford spent her final years learning what Charlotte had known all along. Power is not what you have. It's what people believe you have, and once you lose it, you never get it back. The end. Charlotte won the inheritance, but she lost her mercy. Some say she became exactly like the woman she destroyed. Others say this was the only way to survive. What do you think? Did Charlotte go too far by letting Vivian die alone in prison, or was this the only version of justice that mattered? Let me know in the comments. I'll be hearting the most cold-blooded responses. If you enjoyed this takedown, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories.